Jaguar stopped making cars and they've become this. Is this the greatest prank of all time, or is this another company that's completely out of touch with reality? Well, in today's video, let's dive into the Jaguar story, figure out where they started and how they got to this. Now, if you know anything about England in the early 1900s, they were making motorcycles. And I mean a lot of motorcycles. And Jaguar was originally the Swallow sidecar company founded in 1992. There were two business partners when it came to the Swallow sidecar company, and eventually they went from making sidecars to producing coach-built cars. If you know anything about the cars in the early 1900s, when they first started out, a lot of cars were coach-built. This means that the bodies of the cars were actually made by different coach builders, whether it was in England, France, or even Germany. Cars back then were really different from cars now, and especially when you're buying a car like a Rolls, they were coach-built, custom-built to the person who had ordered the car. Long story short, Jaguar made a coach-built car without proper permission. They enjoyed it, and they continued to make coach-built cars until they made their own vehicle. Now, they changed their name in 1945 to Jaguar, but 10 years earlier, in 1935, the SS Jaguar 2.5 Saloon came out. This was the first car, and it was extremely beautiful, but not only that, it was extremely affordable. Then in 1948, Jaguar launched the XK120, the 120 standing for 120 miles per hour. The XK120 was the fastest production car, and it costed significantly less than a lot of other performance cars out there. And this was the recipe that Jaguar really saw success with, making very affordable, insanely beautiful, and very fast machines in their early days. Jaguar, in development with Dunlop in 1953 with the Jaguar C-Type, was the first ever car to be featured with disc brakes. Jaguar, once again, ahead of the pack when it comes to development in racing products and performance. They were very successful in Le Mans, and they made history with Stirling Moss at the driver's seat of one of their cars. And then the C-Type was then adapted to the D-Type, and once again, they were extremely successful at Le Mans, winning 3 years in a row in 55, 56, and 57. Then in 1961, the Jaguar E-Type came out, arguably the most influential Jaguar of all time. Now, Jaguar at this point, following the D-Type, coming out with the E-Type, it wasn't very successful when it came to racing, but it was very, very influential with movies and pop stars. The E-Type is an absolute icon when it comes to vintage cars. But then in 1966, this is the point when Jaguar fell off the cliff and I think never recovered. In 66, Jaguar merged with British Motor Holdings and then again merged with Leland Motors. Then in 1975, they nationalized themselves, which became a product of the government. At this point, there was only one of the original business partners still in Jaguar and involved in their day-to-day, and this is the point where he left, and the British government really had no reason to develop high-end luxury sports cars when their economy was struggling and they had to focus more on their day-to-day brands, which were part of that larger merger. Now, this did not prevent Jaguar from still building race cars. They built the XJR9 in 1988. They actually won Le Mans. But a few years earlier, Jaguar had actually been listed for sale, and a couple years after that had now been acquired by Ford Motor Company. Now at this point, things started to look a little bit up for Jaguar, because Ford and Jaguar had come on with the XJ220, which once again put Jaguar at the top with the fastest production car in the world. Even though it did not last very long, but there was a huge underlying issue that eventually made Ford sell Jaguar. And the issue was the fact that Jaguar wasn't making any money. Ford lost $15 billion keeping the Jaguar name associated with them, and eventually they had to kick the brand. And if you don't know anything about the last 2 decades in American history, there was a huge recession in 2008, which then Ford decided to sell Jaguar off to the company that currently owns them. In 2008, Tata Motors, an Indian company, bought out the rights for Rover and Jag. In 2013, things started to look up for them. They launched the F-Type, which went a huge way into putting a proper brand image back into people's eyes. Jaguar started to make competitive cars again, but with their competition and the issues the cars were having, they have now stopped making cars. In 2024 and 2025, Jaguar will not be making any cars, and now we're getting AI-generated images of this new change that says copy nothing, but it looks like a Rolls-Royce Wraith. Now, the launch of the F-Type was great. They started to build cars that enthusiasts started to care about. Jaguars have been known to have issues. English engineering has always had multiple faults. They've always been a little temperamental, they've always had some issues, but at the end of the day, you still have the enthusiasts that love the cars for what they are. The problem with Jaguar is they became overpriced, uncompetitive, and they started to make EV cars and go towards a way that the market has dictated no one really wants. The electrification of Jaguar is what ended up killing them, and now the fact that they're going 100% EV is most likely going to spell another bankruptcy in my opinion. Now the big three of Audi, BMW, and Mercedes have always been Jaguar's competition, but Jaguar has always been able to be a little bit cheaper when it comes to those cars and be a different alternative when it comes to the big three. The problem with Jaguar is the fact that they can't compete with those companies anymore. When the F-Type came out, we all loved it, but Jaguar never really did anything proper with it. They tried updating it, but then they just kept the same car running for years. Jaguar did some certain concepts which people loved, like the Project 7, but they never actually made them, and that kind of killed the enthusiasm behind them. Forget everything in the past, however. Their new message and their new MO is going to be to make this high-end electric car, which sounds like they're trying to compete with Rolls-Royce. But if you can't compete with BMW, Audi, and Mercedes, how are you going to compete with Rolls-Royce? The thing about electric cars that Tesla has now kind of flipped is it's about mass production. You need to make a ton of cars, you need to make them as fast as possible because these cars are consumables. They're not things that you can now collect and keep in your garages because it's an electric car. There's no like real soul to it, anything like that. If you're not driving them, if you're not using them, the batteries are just going to degrade, and over a decade period, you now have a car that you just throw away. With EV technology evolving, hopefully that'll come to change, but at the moment, yes, if you have a car that's about a decade old when it comes to electric cars, it's not going to have the same range and life that it had when it was brand new. Now, it does go for internal combustion cars, but when you got a vintage car, you can do a tune-up and you can get them back to where they need to be. You know, it's like a phone. Cars have become like an iPhone or whatever if you use an Android. They're consumable. You buy a new one after a few years because the battery life is no longer what it was. The manufacturer no longer supports updates to the phone or the car anymore. That's going to happen. You're going to have to be forced to buy a new car every few years, and they're supposed to be made to be more basic, but in reality, there is a problem with electric cars. And this boils down and affects Jaguar because they no longer have enthusiasts that were buying their cars just because it has a Jaguar name on them. They've been struggling for many years, and the fact that if they do go fully electric, I don't think that they're going to be very successful. Now, if we do look at the big three from America, for example, all of them are struggling with electric cars. We can possibly see bankruptcy. I honestly think that these companies will be phased out at this point if they don't drastically improvise and start to buy out companies that are making electric cars. Now, government will probably not let that happen, but from a just consumer point of view, they probably would go bankrupt with the regulations the government is trying to put. I don't think that they can compete with the Volkswagen Group, with Porsche, Audi, Rivian, Scout, Volkswagen. They can't compete to the offerings with the electric cars that they're bringing. They can't compete with the BMW Group with the low end with Mini, with the middle ground with BMW, and with the higher end with Rolls-Royce. There's enthusiasts at every level when it comes to that, even with the electric cars. And I just don't think that Jaguar will be able to bring that enthusiasm that those companies have because of the cars they've been making for the last 20 years, as Jaguar hasn't had a proper enthusiast base for an extended period of time since the 70s. Now, is this a prank? I mentioned this at the beginning of the video. Imagine Jaguar, with all of this publicity, actually turns it into something positive. For the first time in over a decade, people are talking about Jaguar. If they come out with a bland EV car and the concept that they're showing, there's going to be some people who talk about 3 months later, everyone's going to forget. But if Jaguar, with all of this hype behind them now, actually comes out with a proper internal combustion lineup, would it be so out of pocket for them to develop a sports car and throw a BMW driveline into it? I really don't think so. Now, Jaguar says they copy nothing, so they kind of be copying the Supra with that, but who says you gotta put a B58? Who says you gotta make it a two-door coupe, right? I think Jaguar has a fantastic opportunity right now, with all the eyes on them, to stick some internal combustion engines into their cars. Even though the cars within the next 10 years would probably have to be phased out, this would bring some much needed enthusiasm into the Jaguar brand. If anyone from Jaguar is watching this video, consider hiring me because I'm definitely a professional who knows what I'm talking about. With all that being said, if you did enjoy the video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and as always, I will see you guys in the next video.